So when you're first playing, your intuitive sense is, I should play my stuff and then attack. And you can play that way. The game functions completely fine playing that way, but you're not playing optimally.
Right.
Distraction makers.
Why does Magic have 2 main phases?
Because it's more fun.
More fun.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
All right.
Thanks for
See
coming.
ya. But why, though?
Okay, so you asked me that earlier, and my initial thoughts when I think about why there's 2 main phases, because it is weird. It's unintuitive.
Yeah.
And you look at most modern games now, you play cards however you want to play cards, right? There's not a segmented, this is when you play, this is when you attack. You can't play these things when you're attacking. In my opinion, I think my feeling of what's most important is that it keeps the tension, because there's a possibility that after this attack, there could be more, you know.
Right, yeah.
You're not just safe after the attack. There's still mystery. There's still hidden information. You don't know what's in their hand.
Yeah, and I do think that the turn structure and the 2 main phases has a lot to do with the fact that there are instant speed things in the game. So let's look at one of the heuristics that comes from having 2 main phases. Paulo Vitor is a professional Magic player who wrote a really good article about 6 heuristics. And the 6 that he talks about are very nuanced and high level play. So one of the things that he talks about, a heuristic for him, is that he plays a land in his first main phase, and then attacks, and then he plays the rest of his spells in his second main phase. And if we look at the reason why he does this, it's pretty interesting. So intuitively, as a tournament player, you might think that you want to hold that land in your hand of cards. And the reason why is because you're thinking, well, if I have more cards in hand, my opponent will think, oh, he has more things that he can do. Where if you play the land, your opponent, now you have less cards in your hand for your opponent to guess what they are. But you have opened the possibility space in what might be playable.
Right.
You've now let's say you had 2 mana available. Now you have 3 mana. That means that there's a lot more cards that you might be able to play at instant speed when you attack, and you're putting that mental load on your opponent, right? So now they have more things that they need to worry about while you're attacking. And then, of course, you play the rest of your stuff in your second main phase because you wanted to have that mana up to make them think that you could play something, whether you could or couldn't. If you had played that stuff in your first main phase, your mana's all tapped. They know you don't have any kind of interaction when you're attacking. So then that sort of brings up the question of, okay, well, why is there a first main phase then? Why not just have everything happen in the second main phase? And if you think about it that way, it's like, okay, well, there's probably sometimes stuff that you want to play during your first main phase. Let's say you have a Lord or something, which is a creature that buffs your other creatures of the same creature type. So you'd want to play that before you attacked, obviously, because you want to get the most out of that card before you pass the turn.
I mean, also, even if we just think about, like, systematically, right, when Richard Garfield and all them were working on this initial version of Magic, it probably just feels more intuitive. That
it does.
Your turn starts, and no, you can't play your cards.
Right.
Everything on your board right now, you have to swing. Right.
Then
and
you get to, it doesn't matter.
It feels much more natural to, okay, I'm going to set up my attack.
Yes.
Then I'm going to attack. Then I'm going to react to the outcomes of that attack.
And you bring up a really good point about this being part of the mastery of the game, is like understanding how to interact with these systems most optimally, right? So when you're first playing, your intuitive sense is, I should play my stuff and then attack.
Right.
And that's true and works, and you can play that way. The game functions completely fine playing that way, but you're not playing optimally.
Right.
We've now built a system in which to play most optimally most of the time is what Paulo Vitor is mentioning, that play a land and then play your spells in your second main phase. This systems level design is really interesting. So let me explain real quick the difference in when we talk about something that is systems level versus mechanics level.
Right.
And it's very Magic influenced, right? Systems level is basically the systems that are outside of the cards, and mechanics level is cards. It's the things that the cards do. And so building this type of variance into your system is really, really interesting, because you're saying that, okay, you can play all of, like, not any one card you have can now be played in multiple ways. You can play it in your first main phase, or you can play it in your second main phase. So from baseline, every card in the game can be played at least 2 different ways.
And I like that because I don't remember if we actually did a video on this, but I've been looking into mechanics for games recently. And games are a lot simpler when you think of them in very simple terms, but it just seems weird that they could all be so simple.
Right.
And almost every single mechanic in any game ever can be chunked down into 2 possibilities, is that you are either moving towards the win condition or you are investing to potentially move towards the win condition even greater.
Yes.
And when you look at it as a main phase 1 to main phase 2, that's essentially what that is. Main phase 1 is you're trying to get the win condition. Main phase 2 is, well, maybe I'm going to get it, at a greater pace later on. Or in another way, you hold your mana, right? And I would consider this sounds like a very similar heuristic that a beginning Magic player could learn, similarly to when you teach someone in the very beginning, like, hey, you have an instant spell. So it's your advantage right now to actually not use it right this second.
Mm-hmm.
It is better to wait until you see what they do, and then you can decide what to do.
Put yourself in a situation to use that spell to its most advantageous.
Yes.
Right?
So I think what's interesting about the tension part, I think that the reason I think that that's most important is because I don't think a lot of people consider like how Magic feels as a game when you're playing it. And we talk a lot about systems in games and how they make you feel. Yes. And the thing that Magic does really, really well is it feels like there's obviously all of this possibility space of what could happen. And opening it up while also being able to chunk that information, I think is something that Richard really, really cared about when making the initial
we're on
game.
a first-name basis with Richard now, huh?
Him and I go way back. Me and old Richie.
Richie.
Richie boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richie,
I met him once, and he doesn't remember me.
Richie PhD.
Yeah, Richie PhD. That's what we used to call him on the block.
That's what we called him.
No, but I think that when you have that, having that additional main phase in there, it really does... do this as a test. We do this because we're dorks, all right? We love game design. We test all sorts of different things. Yeah. Play Magic without a main phase 2 and see how it feels. Yeah. And, it's not the same. Nope. It's so much simpler. It's significantly simpler, and that it's very predictable what's happening, right?
Or play with only main phase 2.
Right.
See how that feels.
And that probably just feels weird.
It's going to feel super weird. So if we're talking about phases in general, because a lot of these, I guess more modern card games have sort of eliminated phases, right? You can play a spell, you can attack, you can do whatever, and
which I see value in that.
So
in a way that feels intuitive, but it actually complicates things exponentially. So
one, I think, good example of why in a paper format, it's very difficult to do this is the ability Vigilance. So if you don't have phases and you can attack with whatever creatures you want, whatever order you want to, and you have a creature that has Vigilance, how do you know whether or not that creature has attacked?
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So there's no way to really know. So you can't have things that have Vigilance, basically. So what Vigilance is design space that if you don't have phases, you can't really utilize, because unless you have a different way to notate whether a creature is attacked rather than turning it sideways.
Right. And I think if you were to look at a lot of tabletop games, too, in particular, a lot of them do utilize phases, right? But I do think that the more digitized games have become over time, the more that people are relying on digital games to be able to count for them, rely on different phases. It's not a bad thing, right? Hearthstone gets away with this in a great way, is that when there's a digital card game that can do all the math for you and can remember what's attacked and what hasn't attacked and all that stuff, then you don't have to worry about it nearly as much, which is great.
And it's a really good way to lean into
the medium.
Being a digital format, you can streamline that process. Having particular phases, a main phase in general, in which you can only play, that's the only place you can play creatures and sorceries unless they have flash or whatever.
Right.
It chunks the possibility space, which we talked a little bit about a minute ago. Chunking just means that you're making information more digestible to the player. And so when we have instant speed things, and we move into combat, we've now chunked the information of, okay, well, I know they can't play sorceries now. I know they can't add any more creatures to the mix, especially as the attacker, right? The attacker says, okay, I attacked. Once you've declared attackers, you can't then play a flash creature that's attacking, right? You as the defender now know, okay, these are the attacking creatures, right? That information is now chunked. There will not be any more attacking creatures. That's what I need to deal with. Now what I need to think about, and it allows you to focus on the next levels up in information hierarchy, is how much mana they have untapped, how many cards do they have in hand. And now we're operating only in the space of instant speed things.
Right, as opposed to also thinking what other creatures could they have, what other sorceries could they have.
Yeah, and also you don't have to worry about like, okay, well, if they play a creature in their second main phase or whatever, that creature can't attack, so I don't need to worry about that right now.
Right. We also talk a lot about systems that you have to make sure that there's almost maybe like a grace period, or like a where the tension releases, right? So the tension builds, right? As, okay, what are the possibilities? What's going to happen? There's a big outcome, and then tension releases, right? And as that tension releases, that's when the players are like, okay, I'm safe. You can't attack me. You're safe. What are you setting up for next turn? This is where there's that divide with design, right? Where you're thinking about the player, but you should also be thinking about the feeling that players are having. Yes. And I do think Magic captures that feeling very, very well, in that I've played other card games, and they do not have that same sort of build up to a great moment, release of tension as you smoothly slide into the next player's turn.
That's a really good point.
But other card games, it's like a massive like jitter, right? Where it's like, oh, they're attacking now. Oh, wait, they're playing this. Okay, well, they're playing that. Oh, they're attacking again. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
and you know, we talk a lot about game design being a story, right?
Yeah.
That like these game systems create an emergent story, and that's a really like great point. That Magic's turn structure follows the story structure. It has that build up to the attack, and then. You know,
I think it's how you can get something that feels really good, regardless of whether you are trying to play it competitively or not.
Yeah.
Right? So competitive players may prefer it this other way, but I think that the feeling of Magic's turn structure is probably why your average player could get in and be like, this is fun. I enjoy this flow, this process.